Hi, everyone, and welcome to our PrecureCon webinar with GEP, Taming Costs, How to Achieve Rapid and Sustainable Results to Impact Growth. Thank you for joining us. Today, we'll dive into strategies to focus on in the new normal and the true value of a well-implemented cost management program. We encourage you at any time throughout this presentation to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And now, I'll hand it over to Todd from GEP.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for everyone for joining this webinar. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this topic. It's a hot topic today. There's a lot going on within procurement and how do you still tame those costs while doing everything else that you're doing today. So nice to meet everyone. Quick background for team members. My name is Todd Bremer. I'm a vice president within GEP. I've been in consulting 15 plus years, focusing heavily on procurement transformation. And so it's great to be able to meet everyone today. And for those of you that do not know GEP, we're a woman and minority owned sourcing and procurement organization, focusing heavily on anything from strategy all the way down to managed service. So we are a full end-to-end procurement consulting organization. Before we get into the topic, I wanted to take a step back, just kind of lay the land of how we view what's going on in the world today. It's been a few crazy years, right? You think back of COVID happened. It's now been a couple of years since we've kind of evolved over that. And a lot of us as procurement professionals would have liked to have taken a step back and said, take a breather. That's not happening. The market conditions are continuing to evolve. We have the Ukraine war. We have a lot of other aspects with inflation that's going on. And so this is now becoming 2023 is another year heavily focused on procurement, and organizations are relying heavily on procurement to help with some of their goals and objectives. So you take what's going on in the market today, plus the increase in sustainability. And we've talked about this as procurement leaders for years. It's here to stay. And it's not only here to stay, but it is becoming such a hot topic with my clients. And it's becoming a growth engine. And so this is an area they're looking to generate revenue because this is what their customers want. And so procurement has a unique opportunity to be able to help push this agenda, get out of the more cost side and get more into that sustainability or that growth side. But as all this is going on, there's also shifting priorities from a supply chain perspective and resiliency. And how do you make sure that from what's going on in Ukraine, how do you make sure your supply chain is still resilient enough to be able to meet the needs of your clients? And so that is something that is also hot on the topic. So with all that being said, in summary of this, from inflation to the global economy to energy crisis that's going on, you can name this. I'm assuming this will resonate really well with all of you as to what is going on in today. And so the big question for procurement is, where do I focus? How do I still achieve my goals that have been set, with most of those goals still becoming cost savings, cost opportunities, but also what do I do to be able to impact the organization as much as I can? And so it's a big question, and a lot of leaders have come to me saying, Todd, I'm getting asked to go in 50 different directions. I'm not given the staff to be able to do it. And how can I now go ahead and meet all those objectives? Where should I help focus my organization? And so that's what I wanted to bring today is our point of view on where procurement should be focusing. How can you still achieve those sustainable costs, but at the same time, help the company grow? And so we've boiled it down into 5 specific areas to focus on. One is, and we'll go into detail on this, but go beyond the savings metrics. Savings are a critical component within procurement, but there are other metrics as well to be discussed. The second is around dual ownership. I'll get into a lot more detail about that, but many companies focus on say, oh, I need to have some type of cost savings, or I need to have this initiative, and it all falls on procurement's lap. So how do you more jointly partner with the business to be able to yield the true right outcome? 3 is around data source. Everything's being measured now. Everything is being measured in the digital age. That is something that is not going to go away. And so how do you get away those internal conversations around, is there a benefit here? Did this add value? Did it not? What can you do to make sure that you're all talking the same language? We'll get a little bit about bad cost. Everyone can go out to RFPs. Everyone can go ahead and try to just squeeze out on pricing. But as we know, given where inflation is, we need to think differently. We need to think outside the box. We need to think about more levers than sourcing. That includes demand, that includes influencing budgets we'll get into. And then how do you sustain that going forward? What does that team look like? How do you make sure that procurement's not on an island by themselves? So the first metric, go beyond savings. We still have to have savings. Savings is here to stay. Procurement organization will always have some type of target. The targets are evolving. Used to just be straight P&L, not as focused on capital. Now cash has become king. So there still is a relevant focus on cost savings. But if you're just focused on cost savings, you're not in the business of helping the company grow. Yes, you can take those cost savings to reinvest, but there are other areas that procurement needs to be focusing about and helping to convince their CPO, their COO that these metrics are critical to the success of the overall organization. And so we've broken them down into 4 different buckets: operational efficiency, cost protection is what we're calling it. There's inflation. Now, a lot of people say cost avoidance. This is cost protection. So there's cost avoidance, there's cost savings, but this is about cash. And how do you make sure that you can optimize cash for your organization? Risk, I mentioned it previously around supply chain risk. You can save money, but if the product is not getting to the shelf, then that's a challenge. And so that's something that for my clients, and I don't think I mentioned before, but I run retail and consumer goods for GEP, is hot on our clients' mind. And then ESG, it's here to stay. Sustainability is here to stay. It is now part of the fabric, the DNA of almost all customers, especially the new generation, that this is something that's critical to them, and you need to make sure this is a priority. And procurement can have a massive influence on it. So the first area is around changing the game, changing the metrics. I always say, what gets measured gets done. And so you've got to make sure that even though cost is part of this discussion today, that all of these metrics are measured. Second, I said around a dual ownership. Many organizations, especially as the beginning part of maturity within a procurement organization, throw procurement at almost everything. They say procurement can go ahead and drive savings. Oh, procurement can go ahead and lead this initiative. Procurement can go ahead and lead that initiative, but they're not empowering them to do it. And so there's this tension between procurement trying to go ahead and drive costs out of the organization, with others within marketing or within facilities that are trying to either expand customer experience, look at their supply chain in a different way. And so this concept around dual ownership is something that we believe heavily in. Think of historically where budget owners work with finance, they go ahead and within that aspect they go back and forth and they agree on some type of a budget. Typically, it is based on a percentage from last year. Finance doesn't really have the category knowledge or the details to be able to say, here is what I think it should be based on these 5 market conditions. And so that's a challenge. If procurement's not at the table having that discussion, that's a challenge. But then the evolution has now had where procurement now in many organizations does have a seat at the table during this budgeting cycle, but they're almost viewed as the bad cop. They're viewed as the individual that is coming in, setting up targets or setting up what it should be. And so there's this tension within procurement that's going on that we think that there's a much more optimal way to do it. And to do that, to be able to drive true benefits to the organization, is to bring in the concept regarding category owners. So category ownership, it's a very simple concept. It means during the budgeting process and ongoing, instead of having procurement be that gatekeeper that is going to be looking at ways to optimize cost, you have someone in the business that is within head of facilities, not just within one business unit, but across all. So you're starting to mimic the way that procurement would be, but it's typically an executive or someone highly respected within each area, contractors and consultants. Normally the category owner is a CFO or one below the CFO. That now brings in the healthy tension to be able to have those discussions as to, do I truly need a contractor or consultant? And it takes procurement out of that being a gatekeeper and more of an enabler. When you do that, it allows for cultural change. It allows for the company to think differently. It also allows for transparency. It's not procurement trying to knock on the door. You now have someone that's on the inside trying to go ahead and help optimize across. There's also tracking and monitoring that we'll get into later around how those data sets come into play and how that tracking and monitoring now can go ahead and help with visibility and help with cost optimization up front versus towards the end. Number 3, as you start thinking about how do you start impacting the organization and truly sustaining cost, is speak the same language as the rest of your organization. We all know that procurement data is heavily influenced by invoice data. So that is one data source that we're looking at when we go try to optimize cost. There's a way we're looking at it from invoice. Finance is looking at it from a completely different angle. They're looking at it from general ledger data. That general ledger data needs to tick and tie to their trial balance, which ticks and ties what you're announcing to the market. We all know they're not aligned. Procurement data has capital in it. Your financial data typically is an expense, and then CapEx are separated. So that expense line item is in there. And so again, you're not talking the same language. Plus there's a time differentiation between the two. And the third area that most companies now have evolved, where there are purchase orders. I'm just speaking with a client yesterday where that still is not a no PO, no pay up policy. It's still there with a lot of starting up newer procurement organizations, but it also is giving you a different message as to what that data looks like. It has a lot of amazing insights into what that data is, what you're spending it, how you're spending it. So the key is to link these together to be able to have one source of the truth that then you can say you're going to impact something and it's going to be sustainable. Most procurement organizations say, here's what I've saved. It's 12 months. If you have this linked together, you now can track that over time. And it really is the holy grail, and it's not impossible. Many of my clients are doing it. We've helped many of them be very successful at this. So now they can truly control and monitor this upfront. The other benefit is, if this is done correctly, as a purchase order is created, you should be able to look and see, is there budget left to spend? What have we already allocated out of the budget and what is remaining? So that you can call it up front and say either decline or there's some other way to do it so that you're not overspending. Doing just that alone helps with demand. That helps with savings. So it's these little nuances or how you're optimizing that is a big focus today. RFPs are still going to be there, but it's around specifications, demand management, and asking the question, do I have the budget and do I need to be spending these dollars? Eliminating bad cost. So we view it at GEP as not all costs are bad. There are a lot of good costs. You have to have lots of costs. Marketing, for example, is when you do benchmarking, I've given to clients and it says, oh, you're in quartile 1. Well, that could actually be a bad thing, right? Because if you're in growth mode, you need to be spending marketing. You need to be efficient in how you're optimizing it. But just because you're spending less does not mean that is a good thing. Now, procurement still needs to focus on the typical drivers, such as RFPs, looking at high efficiency process improvements, looking at any type of cost reduction through analytics or through robotics? How can you bring in any type of efficiency through automation? Obviously, within organizations, looking at spans and layers to help overall SG&A. But there's a whole different side to look at as well. And some organizations, depending on where you are in your maturity level, have allowed procurement to have a seat at the table and some have not. A demand lever is the number one view. If you think about savings and the way it can be achieved, typically 70% of savings comes from demand in one shape or another. 30% normally comes in price. Demand, you could say, has some specification in it. Price could have some specification in it, but that's normally a 70-30 split. So if procurement wants to continue to have a sustainable seat at the table to be able to drive those savings, demand is going to be critical to that, and to have procurement have a seat at the table at that. Just one example within that would be consulting. Within consulting, at the beginning of the year, instead of having a budget allocated out 100%, many of my clients were recommending now it's an 80%, where 20% now is allocated as a buffer for more strategic priorities, that then procurement can partner with that category management that I had discussed before to reallocate that. So now you're helping think through the growth side, not just looking to see where can I cut on the cost efficiency side. That's just one example, but there are certainly many others. Also, can I industrialize? Can I digitize certain processes? How are you looking at it from an efficiency standpoint? So that automation, again, is going to be critical. Also around centralization. So as procurement starts thinking about different business units, how they're operating, a lot of more immature organizations had a very challenging time of getting the business units to be able to link together. That's where that cost of the category owner comes into play, that dual ownership, to help procurement get that spend under management to help drive those efficiencies. That then leads to larger areas within the traditional procurement route, but also allows you to have a seat at the table for other aspects around specifications and demand. And obviously the last strategic sourcing, that's a given. I think all of us on this call have lived and breathed that in many years, but it's the other levers that are the key, especially in this day and age, to be able to drive continuous improvement and really optimizing cost over the course of time. The last is around, how do you sustain this? We've talked about the dual ownership. We've talked about having one voice of the data. So now you're talking on the same level, so procurement can truly see what is the spend that's going on by category, by subcategory. But how do you make this real and sustainable over time? And how do you make sure you're monitoring that progress over time? Many procurement organizations, they come in, they go through sourcing efforts, and they leave. And they're not continually looking to see what else can I be doing differently? How could I optimize what I did, or this engagement that I had put together? How can it be optimized even further? Is it working? Is it not working? To do that, you need several components. You need to be able to have a team that is partnering CPO, CFO, program sponsors. And when we see program sponsors, a lot of times it is the presidents within each one of the businesses, depending on how large of an organization you have, or a division. They need to have a seat at the table and need to be operating on the same data set and the same goals and objectives that procurement would have as well. Then you have those category owners that are underneath. Those category owners are going to be the right-hand person to procurement that are partnering with them. They're looking at budgets on a monthly basis. They help with that kind of healthy tension between budget owners, finance, and procurement to be able to say what really is those costs and how is it going forward. They're also helping to make decisions along the way. Obviously, you have your budgeting process at the beginning of the year. You continue to evolve every quarter. You're looking at even monthly. You're looking at how to optimize your budgets. Those category owners now can have a seat at the table to say, here's what's going on. Here's how the priorities have changed. And here's how, based on what's going on, based on input from procurement, here's how I think that we could optimize or do things a little bit differently. So you can navigate or steer that ship in a little bit different of a way. And the last part is around analytics. Data is king. as I mentioned before, without having those analytics, without having those key insights that you're driving those, it's really challenging to be able to make any meaningful impact to keep those cost savings sustainable. You could always have a one-time effort, but to keep them sustainable, that's something that we've got to be able to have those analytics. And to do that again, you've got to be able to link the general ledger data, the invoice data, the PO data with your project pipeline. So that's something I did not mention before, but there is a data set that is included, which is your project pipeline. Here's what the pipeline looks like. Here's how it's going to impact what the data looks like. And here's what it actually happened after. That then can go into, as PO or purchase orders come in, now it's within a rec. Is there a true budget based on the forecast we have and based on what we're looking at from a budget standpoint to be able to spend this dollar? What's been allocated? What's our savings forecast? Is there money left on the table? So this works really well of having this cross-functional team. Many people have called it in the past control tower. Call it a control tower on steroids because it involves different team members from different parts of the organization that now are aligned on the same goals and objectives. So I'm going to pause there just for questions. I wanted to be able to have this as a dialogue. So that at least tees up the conversations. Would love to know as to what you're seeing in your organization. Are these some of the big challenges that you're seeing? Any detailed questions you want me to answer? Would love to open it up to the team.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that presentation, Todd. And I'm sure everyone found that incredibly useful and insightful. I know for sure I did. So first, I do see a couple questions about will the deck be available after this meeting? And I want to just quickly answer that. So yes, there is going to be a recording of this presentation, and it's going to be available to you via the link that Zoom sent you for this webinar. So you can click on that link again if anytime you want to access this presentation again. So yeah, let's go into some questions. I see one here. So the first question is, who is typically involved in a dual ownership model?
So within a dual ownership model, you normally have category owners that need to be assigned. Those category owners are part of either a business unit, but within the business unit, let's just say marketing as a category owner. If a business unit has 70% of the marketing spend, then that leader would be the category owner across all. So there is somewhat of a standardization across. There are nuances within each organization and how you're set up, but there does need to be a ownership that category owner needs to understand the category. For a contractors, consultants, outsourced business support, things like that, typically it resides with the CFO. Somebody within the CFO's organization that has enough clout, sometimes depending on the level that you want of control, CFO sometimes directly, depending on the threshold, but it is somebody within the finance organization. So each area slightly differs, or each category, depending on what you're trying to achieve. But that person is key because they're going to be the ones that are given the savings target, not procurement. So if there's a savings target of $40 million in facilities, that person is the person that gets the target. Procurement now becomes that enabler that can help partner with the business to identify where to optimize that. And it's very different because now you're coming with levers versus anyone in finance could just say, take 10% out of your business and go do it. This now becomes, you have leaders that have a target to hit with procurement's enabling that.
Great. So we just had a question come in. So the first one is, totally agree on demand management from both a cost and a sustainability perspective. What is the best way to influence demand?
Get ahead of it. And so that's the part that upfront budget discussion is key. Procurement has to have a seat at the table. It goes back to, again, of making sure you have other friends in the business that are partnering with it, but that demand is key. And second is procurement does need to be knowledgeable. So the days of having procurement just have a seat at the table and sending out RFPs, receiving them, you've got to have that category expertise, where during the budgeting, there is going to be a healthy tension. That tension should not be with procurement, though. It should be with that category owner that is in the business. But it's upfront is one. And then two, on that control and monitoring side, you need to have, before any requisition is approved and a PO is flipped, do you have the budget? We've gone through clients of leveraging different of our software that says, hey, look at, I'm 15 days late, and every time I'm trying to reconcile a budget, I'm coming in 15 days after, and I'm already over. So how do I get ahead of this up front to say, do I really need that? That's the second. And I would say the third, procurement does have the responsibility to ask the question. And this is not an easy conversation, but when an initiative does come to us, is it needed?
Thank
If not,
you.
what are we doing differently in the organization? So those three, that third question is tough, especially within procurement. You try to get ahead of that, but there's no reason why, if you have a relationship with your stakeholders, you cannot ask that question.
And so the next question that came in was, what are some key performance indicators that organizations can use to measure the effectiveness of their procurement function, and how can these KPIs be used to drive continuous improvement in procurement processes?
Yep. So if I go back to up here, we break it down into 4 key areas. So operational efficiency, cost protection. I can even send out an example of the details in it, and then within ESG. But these are 4 that we have that are general. My high recommendation is you need to align what are the goals and objectives of your business partners. It's not procurement's KPIs, it's your organization's KPIs. What is your CEO or CFO being measured on? What is your CMO being measured on? What are each one of your businesses being measured on? How can then procurement enable that through similar metrics? Just as you're trying to align with their metrics, that dual ownership also says that they need to align with some of the more operational or efficiency metrics as well. So they need to have some metrics in their performance goals that are aligned. But the goal would be is, we have 50 different metrics, I could tell you, but they need to align with what your company, if ESG is important to your company, and that's part of your CEO's plan or CFO's plan or your CMO's plan, that needs to be in your plan as well. If it's not, then that's something you can start rattling the cage as to why not, but that would become less of a metric to be able to focus on.
All right, thank you. And okay, so the next question here is, what are examples of demand levers, and which categories typically have the largest savings? So
demand comes in many different forms, but most demand where you can influence, especially this year, is around a lot of the overhead areas. It's a lot of SG&A, and it's a lot within that area, such as contractors, consultants. Within let's look at temp labor, for example. Has your organization gone through a thorough review of who are your temps? How long have they been here? Are they needed? What are the roles that they're performing? Can they be doing something different? After 6 months, do you have some type of a process in place that can say, is that needed? On the consulting side, is there a formal review process to say, does this consulting spend align with our strategic objectives? How is it prioritized? What's the ROI associated with that? And 6 months later, when you actually go through the sourcing process you were budgeted early on, is that still the priority of the company to be able to do? Those are 2 more meatier examples. Obviously, travel used to be before the pandemic. That was a big area around limiting who's traveling, when are they traveling. For events, policies to put in place as to what's the type of event, how many people should be attending, when should they attend. Those types of demand levers. Office supplies, easy way from a demand. have a target, $250 per person. That includes printing as well, versus having budgets being done with historically of here's what I spent before and here's what another 3% or 5%, depending on what the cost of paper is, and here's what it is to be tomorrow. So those little demands up front are key. Those are just examples.
All right, and then the next question here is, how do I link data sets together?
Okay, so this is the challenge with many organizations. They look and they say, well, I've got invoice data and I have, and finance is saying yes, but I'm looking at it from my general ledger accounts. And so what's their common key? There are definitely common keys. Each financial system has a common key depending on which system you're using and how many different systems you have. But there are common keys that will link. I mean, you're going to have to go in and cleanse the general ledger data just around accruals, things like that, intercompany transfers. But once that kind of noise gets put out, you can link them. And it's usually a set of 3 or 4 key keys that are in each one of those data sets to link them back. Invoice obviously links with PO pretty easily, but it's that general ledger data that is the key. And there isn't a key to it.
Nice. Okay, so we have time for one more question. Let's see. Okay, so the last one would be, how do you determine which metrics procurement should use, as our metric has always been savings?
Yeah, and that goes back to my last comment. I mean, I almost have said like the day of a procurement metric, it should be now what is the corporate metric and how is procurement going to be enabling that? And so I can't say that enough. We're always going to have an ROI. Every single business case for any organization has an ROI included in it, but it needs to align with your company's metrics, not a procurement metric. And I'll take it even a step further. In leading practice organizations, say it again, the metrics associated with their senior leaders outside of procurements also have a metric that has some type of a procurement or cost optimization in it as well.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Todd, for tackling all those questions. And before we wrap up, do you want to explain the QR code in the last slide?
Yeah, so if you take a look here, you can scan it on your computer. You'll also have this, we can send out this presentation on, but if you scan this presentation will be on our website. We also have a ton of other thought leadership white papers to take a look at, scan it. We probably have 200 plus that are up there that are extremely recent that we've done from myself, colleagues, and others. So if there are other topics you're interested in, I'm sure you'll find it by scanning the QR code.
Right, awesome, thank you. And one last question just came in, so this will be the last one we'll answer. But someone just put in, so much of this has been internally focused, management, control tower, shared category ownership, budget control. How do you spare time to actually engage with the supply base?
So the goal of this is to free up your time. So you're not arguing about, is this savings, is this not savings? You're not being spent doing that. You're actually out interacting with your stakeholders and your supply base. You're not having discussions around, do I have visibility? Do I have a data set to understand who my suppliers are, how they're operating? That should already be a well-oiled machine and be done. You should be having data at your fingertips so that you can free up your time doing reporting. You'd be shocked at coming in and myself looking at different operating models and looking to see how you can optimize the amount of time that team members are spending on very tactical activities like reporting, different reports, different parts of the organization. They're asking for these ad hoc reports. That should all be at your fingertips. And that is the goal of this internal, is to free up your time for external. Hopefully that helps.
All right. Well, thank you so much to our audience for joining us today. And also a huge thank you and a big round of applause to Todd for an amazing session today. And like I said earlier, you can look forward to receiving an on-demand link to this presentation directly to your email inbox as well. So keep a lookout for that. So with that, I'll bring this program to an end. On behalf of GEP, ProcureCon, and the WBR Insights team, we thank you for your time today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.